"It's too much, but I accept," she whispered. The cowboy claimed the Apache woman. The sun was high over the dry, rugged plains, painting the horizon in shades of gold and brown. The wind blew harshly across the rocks and cacti, carrying dust that stung the cowboy's eyes. He rode slowly, scanning the land with careful, trained eyes. Life on the frontier was never easy, and years of traveling these wild lands had taught him to expect danger at every turn. He was a man of few words, a loner by choice, with a reputation as someone who could handle himself in any trouble that came his way. People in the towns called him just the cowboy. But behind that simple name was a story of struggle, loss, and survival. On this particular day, he had been riding for hours, following the faint tracks of a gang that had been causing trouble in nearby settlements. Rumors had spread that the gang had been attacking families and travelers, leaving fear in their wake. The cowboy had no desire to get involved in other people's fights unless it was necessary, but he couldn't ignore the danger. Something inside him urged him forward, a quiet voice telling him that this time he could not turn away. As he crested a small ridge, he noticed movement near a dry riverbed. At first he thought it was just a coyote or a wild dog, but then he saw her, a young Apache woman, crouched low against the rocks, her eyes wide with fear. She was alone, and from the way she moved it was clear she was hiding, trying not to be seen. Something about the way she looked struck him. There was strength in her posture, even though fear was written across her face. The cowboy slowed his horse, keeping his distance. He knew better than to rush a scared person. Years of living on the frontier had taught him that patience often saved lives more than force ever could. He called out gently, his voice low and steady, hoping to show that he meant no harm. At first, the woman did not respond. She shifted slightly, clutching something close to her chest. The cowboy noticed it was a small bundle, perhaps her few belongings or something she wanted to protect. The sun reflected off her dark hair, and for a moment, the cowboy felt a strange pull, a sense that fate had brought them together. He had saved lives before, but this situation felt different. "Hey," he said softly. "I won't hurt you. I just want to help." She looked at him, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. She did not speak his language, and he did not speak hers. Yet in that brief moment, an understanding passed between them. She was in danger, and he was someone who could offer protection. Slowly, she lowered herself from her hiding place, keeping her hands where he could see them. The cowboy watched her carefully, his hand never far from the reins, ready to defend both of them if needed. Over the next hour, he tried small gestures to show her that he meant no harm. He offered her water from his canteen, pointing at it and then at her mouth. She hesitated, then slowly accepted it, sipping carefully. Every movement was cautious, but he could see the relief in her eyes. She was not used to trust, and the cowboy understood that. Trust was earned, not given freely. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, the cowboy realized that staying where they were would be dangerous. The gang that had chased her was likely nearby, and the open terrain left them exposed. He motioned for her to follow him, moving toward a nearby canyon where they could take shelter. She hesitated at first, but then nodded slightly, stepping carefully behind him. The ride to the canyon was tense. The woman clung to the horse's side, keeping silent, while the cowboy guided the horse over rocky paths and narrow ledges. Every sound of the wind or a distant bird made her flinch, and he could see the anxiety in her eyes. He did not speak much, knowing that words would not help as much as his calm presence. When they reached the canyon, he helped her down from the horse. The shadows of the cliffs provided some cover, and a small stream trickled through the bottom, giving them water to drink. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a moment of rest, sitting on a rock and watching the cowboy with wary eyes. Night fell quickly in the desert, and the temperature dropped sharply. The cowboy started a small fire, careful to keep it low so it would not draw attention. The woman sat across from him, wrapped in a thin blanket she had carried. Though they did not speak the same language, their actions began to communicate more than words ever could. He shared some of his food with her, breaking it into small pieces so she could eat safely. She accepted it, offering a faint nod in gratitude. As they sat by the fire, the cowboy studied her quietly. She was young, perhaps no older than 20, but there was a wisdom in her eyes that spoke of hardship. Her hands were calloused, her face marked by wind and sun, yet there was a softness in her expression that made him think of home, of family, of something he had long lost. He felt a strange sense of responsibility, a need to protect her not just from immediate danger, but from the world that had forced her to hide alone in the desert. The woman, too, studied him. She saw the determination in his eyes, the calmness in his movements, and the way he handled the horse and the fire with ease. Slowly, her fear began to ease, replaced by a cautious curiosity. She did not yet trust him fully, but she understood that he was different from the others who had caused her harm. There was a sense of safety in his presence, even if the desert around them was still full of threats. Hours passed, and the fire burned low. A cowboy knew they could not stay in one place for long, but he wanted to give her time to rest and regain her strength. He kept watch through the night, listening to every sound, ready to act if danger came. The stars above stretched endlessly, and for a moment the vastness of the desert seemed to make them small and insignificant. Yet in that small canyon, surrounded by rocks and shadows, a bond was quietly forming. A bond that neither of them could yet name, but that would grow stronger with every challenge they faced together. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the cliffs, the cowboy and the Apache woman were ready to move again. The journey ahead would be dangerous, and neither of them knew what lay beyond the next ridge. But for the first time, the woman felt a small measure of hope, a feeling that she might not have to face the desert alone. The cowboy felt it too, the knowledge that something important had begun, something that could not be undone, no matter what trials awaited them. And so, as the sun rose over the frontier, they set out together, two strangers bound by circumstance, trust, and the quiet promise of protection. The desert was wide, the dangers real, and the journey long. But for the first time in a long while, both of them felt that perhaps they had found an ally, and maybe even a friend in a world that had offered them so little. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the rocky desert as the cowboy led the way through narrow canyons and dry river beds. The Apache woman followed closely, her steps careful and measured. Each rock and crevice seemed to whisper danger, and both of them knew the gang that had chased her would not give up easily. Despite the silence between them, an unspoken understanding guided their movements. She watched his every step, noticing how he moved with quiet confidence, how he read the land like an open book. They traveled for hours, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Heat rose from the stones, making the air waver, and the cowboy made sure to keep the woman hydrated, offering her water from his canteen at frequent intervals. Though she could not speak his language, small gestures and nods built the beginnings of trust between them. He pointed to her mouth in the canteen, then mimicked drinking, and she responded by sipping slowly, careful not to spill a drop. Along the way, she began to reveal fragments of her life, not through words, but through gestures and expressions. She pointed to herself, then to the horizon, shaking her head as if to say she had nowhere safe to go. She mimed fear, pointing over her shoulder and crouching low, making it clear the danger was close. The cowboy watched her carefully, understanding more from her actions than he ever could from words. She was resourceful, cautious, and incredibly brave. He respected her for that. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small grove of twisted trees and shrubs that offered rare shade. They paused, allowing the horse to rest while they drank from a shallow spring. The woman knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands to drink, her face pale from both fear and exhaustion. The cowboy kept a vigilant watch, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Though the land was wide and open, danger could appear from anywhere. As they rested, the cowboy took the time to study the woman more closely. Her clothes were worn and patched, evidence of long travel and struggle. Her dark hair hung loosely, streaked with dust from the desert. There was a quiet strength in her eyes, a determination that had kept her alive this far. The cowboy felt a protective urge rise within him, stronger than he had felt for anyone in years. He wanted to keep her safe, to shield her from the violence that had chased her, even if it meant putting himself at risk. They moved again as the sun began its slow descent, the shadows stretching long across the desert floor. The terrain grew rougher, with steep inclines and jagged rocks that made travel difficult. The cowboy led the way, carefully choosing the safest path, while the woman followed, learning quickly how to navigate the difficult land. She stumbled a few times, and he offered his hand, helping her regain balance. She looked at him, eyes wide with gratitude, and for the first time a small smile appeared on her face. It was fleeting, but it was a sign of trust. Night approached faster than they expected, bringing a sudden chill that cut through the desert heat. The cowboy knew they needed shelter, so he guided them to a hidden cave nestled in a rocky hillside. The opening was narrow and easy to defend, providing a safe spot to rest for the night. He made a small fire at the entrance, keeping it low so it would not draw attention. The woman sat close to the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering light, watching him carefully as he prepared their simple meal. She accepted his offer of food with quiet gratitude, breaking the bread he had brought into small pieces to eat slowly. Though they did not speak the same language, the act of sharing became their first form of communication. He understood her needs without words, and she began to sense his intentions were honorable. There was no threat here, no hidden danger, only a man who wanted to protect her and keep her safe. As darkness settled in, the wind howled outside the cave, rattling the rocks and carrying the distant cries of desert animals. The woman shivered, and the cowboy offered her his blanket. She hesitated, unsure if she should accept, then slowly wrapped it around herself. The warmth was comforting, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself a moment of rest. The cowboy kept watch, eyes scanning the shadows, ready to defend them at a moment's notice. In the quiet of the night, a bond began to form between them. The woman studied him, noticing the careful way he handled the fire, the horse, and the surrounding terrain. She realized he was not just strong, but intelligent and patient, qualities that had kept both of them alive. He, in turn, watched her with admiration. Despite the fear she had faced, she had shown courage, resilience, and quick thinking. He could see that she was more than just someone in need of protection. She was a partner in survival, someone who could stand beside him when danger came. The following morning, they prepared to move again. The desert was harsh, and they could not linger in one place for long. The cowboy pointed to the horizon, indicating that they needed to continue, and she nodded in understanding. Her movements were more confident now, less hesitant, as she followed his lead. The journey was still long and dangerous, but with each step, their trust in each other grew. Throughout the day, they encountered natural obstacles, steep ridges, dry washes, and rocky cliffs that tested their strength and endurance. No one had. The cowboy demonstrated how to navigate the terrain safely, showing her where to place her feet, how to climb, and how to read the land for signs of danger. She watched and learned quickly, her sharp mind and instincts complementing his experience. Together they moved efficiently, a silent team bound by necessity and growing trust. By late afternoon they reached a small stream flowing through a narrow canyon. The water was cool and clear, and the woman knelt to drink deeply, splashing her face and refreshing herself. The cowboy watched her, noting the way she relaxed slightly, the tension in her body easing as she regained some strength. He could see that she was beginning to feel safer with him, a feeling that filled him with a quiet satisfaction. He knew the road ahead would still be dangerous, but for now, they had a moment of peace. As night fell once more, they set up a small camp near the stream. The cowboy again kept the fire low, careful not to attract attention. The woman sat across from him, observing how he tended to their camp, preparing food and checking the surroundings. Though she did not speak, her presence felt comforting, and he sensed her growing trust. The bond between them was no longer just about survival. It was becoming personal, emotional, a connection forged in the face of adversity. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but in that small canyon, they had found a temporary haven. They slept in shifts, one keeping watch while the other rested, sharing the responsibilities of survival. Each day brought new challenges, but with every obstacle they overcame together. Their trust and understanding deepened. The cowboy realized that the woman was not just someone to protect. She was a companion, a partner, someone whose courage matched his own. By the time dawn broke again, painting the canyon in shades of pink and gold, both were ready to continue their journey. The road ahead remained uncertain, filled with dangers and unknowns, but they faced it together, no longer as strangers, but as allies. Each step forward strengthened their bond, and though they could not yet speak the words aloud, both knew that trust, respect, and an unspoken connection had begun to form, a connection that would guide them through the trials to come. The morning sun rose slowly over the canyon, casting warm light on the rugged terrain. The cowboy and the Apache woman had grown accustomed to traveling together, moving in silence, but understanding each other through small gestures. Today, however, there was tension in the air. The cowboy sensed it first, noticing faint tracks in the dust, footprints that did not belong to them. His instincts, honed from years of living in the wild, told him danger was close. He crouched beside a boulder, studying the trail carefully. The prints were fresh, likely made the night before, and led directly toward their camp. He motioned to the woman to stay low. Though she did not understand his words, she understood his gestures perfectly. Her eyes widened slightly, and she nodded, crouching behind him. Fear flashed across her face, but she did not run. She trusted him to protect her, and that trust gave her courage. Hours passed as they moved cautiously through the canyon, keeping to the shadows. The cowboy led the way, choosing paths that offered cover while allowing them to move quickly if needed. The woman followed closely, her movements careful and deliberate. She had learned much from him over the past days: how to read the land, how to stay quiet, and how to anticipate danger. Her natural instincts combined with his guidance made them a strong team. By mid-afternoon, they reached a narrow pass between two cliffs. The cowboy slowed, sensing something unusual. The air felt heavier here, the silence more intense. He crouched, scanning the rocks above and below. Then he saw them, the gang. 3 men emerged from behind a ridge, armed and alert, clearly searching for someone. The cowboy motioned for the woman to stay behind a large boulder, using it as cover. She obeyed immediately, her heart pounding in her chest. The cowboy took a deep breath. preparing for the confrontation. He had faced dangerous men before, but this was different. They were after the woman, and he had made a silent promise to protect her. His hands rested lightly on his revolver, though he preferred to use skill and strategy before violence. The gang had numbers, but he had experience and knowledge of the land. He knew how to turn the environment to his advantage. As the gang moved closer, the cowboy noticed that one of the men was distracted, scanning the canyon for any sign of their target. He quietly signaled to the woman to stay low and follow his lead if necessary. She understood immediately, crouching as he moved behind the rocks with careful, silent steps. The tension was high, every moment stretching longer than the last. The first encounter was sudden. One of the gang members spotted a shadow and shouted a warning. The cowboy reacted quickly, diving behind a boulder and drawing the man's attention away from the woman. A brief struggle ensued, fast, precise, and controlled. The cowboy used his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage, moving quickly and striking accurately. Within moments, the first man was disarmed, and the cowboy used a hand signal to warn the woman to remain hidden. The other two men advanced cautiously, realizing their companion was incapacitated. The cowboy knew he could not take them both head-on without risk, so he devised a plan on the spot. He led them toward a narrow section of the canyon, where their numbers became less of an advantage. There, with the walls close on both sides, he could control the fight. The first man recovered slightly, but the cowboy was ready, using his speed and experience to neutralize the threat. The woman watched from her hiding place, her fear mixing with awe. She had never seen someone fight with such skill and calmness. Every move was deliberate, every action precise. She realized that this man, this cowboy, was not only strong but courageous in a way that inspired trust. Even in danger, he maintained control, never letting anger or fear guide his actions. After several tense minutes, the gang was defeated, retreating in confusion. The cowboy quickly checked on the woman, ensuring she was unharmed. She stood shakily, eyes wide, and whispered softly, "It's too much." Though he could not understand the words exactly, the tone carried a mixture of fear and admiration. He nodded slightly, understanding the sentiment. They moved quickly away from the canyon, knowing the gang might return. The woman leaned on him briefly, grateful for his protection. He offered a reassuring nod, silently telling her that she was safe. For now, their bond had deepened in those moments of shared danger, an unspoken understanding growing stronger. She began to see him not just as a protector, but as someone she could rely on, someone she could trust completely. The journey continued through rough terrain, the desert stretching endlessly around them. They encountered dry washes and jagged rocks, testing their endurance and patience. The woman learned to move quietly, her steps becoming lighter and more confident with each obstacle. The cowboy noticed her growing skill and resilience, feeling pride mixed with admiration. She was no longer just someone he protected. She was a partner, contributing to their survival in every way she could. As night approached, they found a small, hidden valley to rest. The cowboy built a low fire, careful not to draw attention. The woman sat nearby, watching him, and for the first time, they shared a quiet moment without fear. She mimed eating, and he shared his food, breaking it into small pieces. Their silent communication had become a language of its own, full of understanding, trust, and mutual respect. Later that night, the cowboy kept watch while the woman slept. He reflected on the day, the danger they had faced, and the courage she had shown. He realized that protecting her was no longer just an obligation. It was personal. He felt a deep connection forming, one that neither of them could yet name but both recognized. It was a bond forged in trust, fear, and shared experience, growing stronger with every challenge. The woman awoke quietly before dawn, watching him with cautious eyes. Though she did not speak, her gaze held questions, admiration, and a growing sense of gratitude. The cowboy acknowledged her silently, offering a small smile. She understood that they were partners now, bound not just by circumstance, but by a shared will to survive and protect one another. By the time the sun rose, they were ready to move again. The desert was vast and danger still lurked around every corner, but they faced it together. Each day strengthened their trust, each challenge deepened their connection, and each small victory over the harsh land and relentless enemies reminded them that they could rely on each other. The cowboy knew the road ahead would not be easy. The gang might return, and other dangers could emerge from the unforgiving desert. Yet with the Apache woman beside him, he felt a sense of purpose he had not known in years. And she, once fearful and alone, began to understand that she was not helpless, that with him she could face the dangers of the frontier and survive. As they continued their journey, moving carefully through the desert, the cowboy and the woman were no longer just strangers. They had become a team, united by trust, courage, and the unspoken bond that had grown stronger in the fire of danger. They did not yet speak the same language, but in their actions, their glances, and their shared moments of survival, they had discovered a connection deeper than words could convey. The day ended with a quiet sunset, painting the desert in brilliant oranges and reds. They set up camp once more, knowing that tomorrow would bring more challenges. But in that moment, with the sky above them and the desert around them, both felt a sense of hope. They had faced danger together and survived. They had built trust, and in that trust, they had found a new strength, one that would guide them through the trials that lay ahead. The desert morning was quiet, broken only by the soft crunch of sand under their boots. The cowboy and the Apache woman had traveled far, leaving the danger of the gang behind for the moment. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape, and the air carried the faint scent of sagebrush. Though the frontier was still harsh and unforgiving, this part of the journey brought a small sense of relief. They were safe for now, but both knew that safety was always temporary in these lands. The woman moved more confidently than before, her steps sure and deliberate. The cowboy watched her with quiet admiration. She had learned so quickly, picking up on his instructions and reading the terrain as if it were a map. She could now navigate the rough trails, identify signs of danger, and even make small adjustments to help the horse over difficult ground. Her courage had grown alongside her skills, and the cowboy realized that she was no longer just someone he protected. She was a true partner. They found a hidden valley surrounded by high cliffs, a natural shelter from the wind. A small stream ran through it, providing water and a place to wash the dust and sweat of the journey from their faces and hands. The cowboy dismounted first, guiding the horse to drink, and the woman followed. She cupped the water in her hands, splashing her face, and then offered a faint smile to the cowboy. That simple gesture spoke more than words could. Gratitude, trust, and a quiet bond forming between them. The cowboy decided they should rest for the day. He built a small fire near the stream, careful to keep it low to avoid drawing attention. The woman helped him gather firewood, and though she worked quietly, her movements were efficient and steady. Watching her, the cowboy felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in years. It was not just relief at her survival. It was admiration for her strength, her courage, and the way she faced the world without surrendering to fear. As the day passed, they shared tasks to prepare for the coming nights. The woman learned how to set up a basic shelter using rocks and branches, and the cowboy showed her how to tend the fire safely. Even without speaking the same language, they communicated through gestures, glances, and actions. Their bond grew stronger with each shared task, and the sense of trust became deeper. She could rely on him, and he could rely on her. Together, they were stronger than either would be alone. By late afternoon, the cowboy decided to teach her more about survival in the desert. He showed her how to read the land, identify animal tracks, and find edible plants. She listened carefully, asking questions with gestures and expressions. The cowboy admired her curiosity and intelligence. She was not just learning for survival. She wanted to understand the land, to know it as he did. He realized that she had a natural connection to the world around her, an intuition that went beyond his years of experience. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the cowboy and the woman sat by the stream, resting. For the first time, they shared a moment of quiet together, not focused on survival or danger. The woman watched him, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight, and he returned her gaze. Though they could not speak each other's language, something passed between them. A recognition of shared experience, mutual respect, and the beginnings of affection. The cowboy sensed her thoughts were turning inward. She had survived so much, faced danger and loss, and now here she was, finally feeling a small measure of safety. He wanted to show her that she did not have to be alone anymore. He offered her a piece of bread from his pack, and she accepted it, smiling softly. That small act became a quiet ritual between them, sharing food, water, and warmth, each gesture reinforcing the bond that had begun in the desert canyons. Night fell, and with it came a cold wind that swept through the valley. The cowboy prepared their shelter, making sure the fire was safe and warm. The woman wrapped herself in her blanket, shivering slightly. He offered his jacket to her, and after a moment's hesitation, she accepted. The gesture was simple, but it carried a message. He would protect her, not just from danger, but from the hardships of the frontier itself. As they settled for the night, the woman reached out her hand slightly, brushing it against his. It was a tentative gesture, full of uncertainty and hope. The cowboy responded gently, placing his hand over hers, offering reassurance. In that silent moment, words were unnecessary. Their connection had deepened beyond survival, beyond fear. It had become emotional, human, and real. Over the next few days, they continued their journey, moving cautiously but with a sense of purpose. They foraged for food, hunted small game, and maintained their shelter. The woman began to show small signs of independence, taking initiative in tasks and offering suggestions. The cowboy noticed this and felt pride and admiration. She had grown stronger, not just in skill, but in spirit, and he knew that they could face any challenge together. One evening, as they rested near a quiet stream, the cowboy noticed the woman staring at the horizon. She seemed lost in thought, her expression serious but calm. He asked her, in gestures, if she was thinking about her family or her home. She nodded slightly, then pointed to him, indicating that he had become important to her in this new chapter of her life. The cowboy understood immediately, feeling a warmth spread through him. He had grown attached to her, as well, more than he expected. As they prepared for another night, the cowboy decided to teach her some basic self-defense. He showed her how to move quickly, stay low, and use the terrain to her advantage. She practiced diligently, her movements becoming more confident and precise. The cowboy smiled quietly, realizing that she was no longer just someone to protect. She was becoming capable of protecting herself. And that made him respect her even more. Their nights were filled with quiet conversation through gestures, occasional sketches in the sand, and shared laughter at small, simple things. Though they could not speak each other's language fluently, They had found ways to communicate that were sincere and meaningful. Trust, respect, and a growing sense of affection connected them. The cowboy began to see her not just as someone in need of protection, but as a partner in life, someone whose courage and heart matched his own. One night, as the wind whispered through the cliffs, the woman leaned slightly toward him and whispered softly, "It's too much, but I accept." The cowboy understood the meaning immediately. She trusted him not just with her life, but with her heart. He felt a deep sense of responsibility and pride, knowing that their bond had grown stronger through shared trials and quiet moments of care. He reached out, taking her hand gently, silently promising to honor that trust. From that night on, their journey was no longer just about survival. It was about partnership, companionship, and mutual respect. Each day, each challenge, each small victory over the harsh frontier strengthened their connection. The cowboy realized that he had found something he had long thought lost, someone to share his life with, someone to trust completely. And the woman, once alone and afraid, had found someone who respected her, protected her, and valued her courage. As they continued moving through the desert, they faced the harsh sun, the rugged terrain, and the occasional threat of danger. But together, they felt a sense of hope and purpose. Each step forward reinforced their bond, teaching them that trust, respect, and shared courage could overcome even the most difficult trials. They had found in each other a partner, a friend, and perhaps even something more, something that would guide them through the days and nights to come. The morning sun spread a warm light across the desert, turning the rocks and sand golden. The cowboy and the Apache woman had traveled far, surviving dangers and harsh weather, and now there was a sense of calm around them. The air was still, and even the wind seemed gentler than before. For the first time in a long while, they could look around and imagine a life not dominated by fear. The hardships of the frontier had shaped them, but they had grown stronger together. The woman moved beside the cowboy with ease, her confidence clear in each step. She had learned so much from him, not only about survival, but also about trust and companionship. She no longer flinched at every sound. Her eyes were alert, but calm. The cowboy watched her, a quiet pride in his heart. She was no longer just someone he protected. She was a partner, capable, brave, and wise. Together they had faced every challenge, and now they could finally think about what lay ahead. That day they arrived at a wide, grassy valley surrounded by gentle hills. It was a rare oasis in the desert, with a small creek running through it, and trees providing shade. The cowboy dismounted and led the horse to water while the woman helped him unload their few belongings. She moved naturally, her gestures confident, as if the land itself were starting to feel familiar. They both understood that this could be a place to rest and build something new, a safe home for the first time in years. The cowboy began to clear a small area near the creek, making a space for a shelter. The woman gathered stones and branches to help, working alongside him without hesitation. Though they still could not speak the same language fluently, their teamwork was seamless. Every glance, every gesture conveyed understanding. Each action reinforced the trust and bond that had grown steadily over the past days and weeks. As the sun climbed higher, they took a break under the shade of a large tree. The cowboy shared water and small pieces of bread with her, and she smiled, a small but genuine expression of happiness. It was a smile that spoke of relief, gratitude, and a quiet joy she had not known in a long time. He smiled back, feeling a warmth he had not felt in years. The dangers they had faced together had created a connection deeper than words, a connection that had turned into care, respect, and the beginnings of love. In the days that followed, they worked together to improve their new home. They built a small shelter using wood and rocks, arranged a fire pit, and prepared the area for cooking and rest. The woman learned quickly, her hands steady and precise, and the cowboy could see that she had a sharp mind as well as a strong heart. She taught him how to find edible plants and small herbs, knowledge passed down from her people, while he showed her techniques for building, hunting, and reading the land. They complemented each other perfectly, each learning from the other, each growing stronger together. As evening fell, the cowboy and the woman sat by the fire. The desert sky turned orange and pink, stars slowly appearing above them. They shared food quietly, their gestures full of meaning. The woman reached out and touched his hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and bond they now shared. The cowboy responded by placing his hand over hers, a promise that he would protect her and stand by her always. Though no words were spoken, their actions said everything. The next weeks passed with a rhythm of work, learning, and quiet companionship. They hunted small game together, gathered water, and maintained their shelter. Every task brought them closer. The cowboy noticed how the woman's courage and skill had grown. She could now manage many tasks on her own, yet she still relied on him when needed. And she noticed his quiet strength, patience, and fairness, qualities that made her feel safe and valued. One morning, as they were gathering water from the creek, the woman paused and looked toward the horizon. She pointed to him and then to the land around them, signaling that she accepted this life they were building together. The cowboy smiled, understanding her message. She was ready to stay, to trust fully, and to share her life with him. It was a turning point, a moment where their partnership became something permanent, something more than survival, a beginning of a shared life. Over the following months, they settled fully into their new home. The cowboy taught her how to plant small crops, and they worked together to build a more solid shelter. She brought knowledge from her people, creating a garden of herbs and edible plants, while he guided her in constructing a space that would protect them from the desert winds and occasional storms. Life was not always easy, but it was theirs, and each day reinforced their bond and deepened their trust. They shared quiet evenings by the fire, sometimes talking in gestures, sometimes simply sitting together and watching the stars. The woman had learned enough English to communicate a little, and the cowboy had learned some of her language. They laughed at the small misunderstandings, finding joy in their shared efforts and the beauty of simple life. The danger that had once defined their days now felt distant, replaced by the steady rhythm of work, learning, and companionship. One night, as the desert wind whispered through the trees, the woman leaned slightly toward the cowboy and whispered softly, "I trust you, and I am happy." Though her words were few, their meaning was clear. The cowboy took her hand and held it gently, a silent promise of protection, care, and partnership. The trials they had faced together, the dangers, the fear, the harshness of the frontier, had led them to this moment. They were no longer just survivors. They were companions, friends, and partners in every sense. Time passed, and their life in the valley grew richer. They raised a small garden, cared for their animals, and helped travelers who passed through, earning respect from the occasional passerby who saw their kindness and courage. The woman taught him more about her people and their traditions, and he shared his knowledge of the frontier and survival. They were not just sharing life, they were building a legacy together. Though challenges occasionally arose, a sudden storm, a wild animal near their shelter, or a minor illness, they faced each obstacle together. Each challenge reinforced their bond, proving that together they could survive and thrive. The cowboy realized that he had found not just a companion, but a partner whose courage, wisdom, and heart matched his own. And the woman, once fearful and alone, found in him someone who valued, respected, and protected her completely. Years later, as the sun set over their valley, the cowboy and the Apache woman stood together, watching the sky turn shades of red and gold. The land around them was calm and beautiful, a home they had built with their own hands. They held hands, silently reflecting on their journey, the danger, the fear, the trust, and the bond that had grown from it all. They had survived, not just by skill, but by trust, respect, and love. Their story became known to travelers and locals, a tale of courage, trust, and partnership. The cowboy, once a lone figure wandering the frontier, had found someone to share his life with. The woman, once alone and afraid, had found safety, respect, and love. Together they had turned the harsh desert into a home, their lives intertwined through shared hardships and quiet, enduring affection. In the end, the cowboy and the Apache woman were more than just survivors. They were partners, companions, and friends who had faced the world together and come through stronger, wiser, and closer than either could have imagined. Their bond, forged in danger and strengthened through trust, became the foundation of a life filled with hope, care, and quiet joy. And in that remote valley, surrounded by the beauty and challenge of the desert, they had found something rare and lasting: a home, a life, and a love that could endure anything.